This week in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis is at its worst in Rafah.
We were home when the airstrikes happened. I told my mom I needed to use the bathroom. Then all the walls of the bathroom and everything above it fell on me.
Leaders in the region and all over the world call for peace.
We must together, along with Arab partners and the international community, step up efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza.
And leaders on Capitol Hill clash over aid money for Israel and Gaza.
With this bill, the Senate declares that American leadership will not waver, falter, or fail.
This is PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. Israel this week sent special forces into the southern Gaza city of Rafah to rescue 2 hostages from Hamas militants. That rescue came at a huge cost. Palestinian authorities said more than 70 Gazans were killed during the operation. The city is now hosting half of Gaza's 2.3 million people. But Israel is threatening a larger offensive in Rafah, where it says Hamas's final 4 battalions are based. As the Israeli military lit the Rafah sky, on the ground, special forces launched a rescue mission. Israel said it raided an apartment complex and traded fire with Hamas militants before it could recover 2 hostages. 60-year-old Fernando Marman and 70-year-old Louis Har reunited with family members after 128 days of captivity. They're the second and third hostages to be rescued, and Israel called their release proof that the military needs to maintain pressure.
This rescue mission underscores the importance of our ground operation in Gaza.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose brother died freeing kidnapped Israelis 48 years ago, called the rescue historic.
I want to tell you that the release of Louis and Fernando is one of the most successful rescue operations in the history of the State of Israel.
The rescue was facilitated by dozens of airstrikes that the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry said killed dozens. Dr. Jamal Al-Hams in blue tried to save the wounded in the only available facility, an overwhelmed tent.
There is no big capacity. There is no ability of that post has because of the short period.
Today, in the operation's aftermath, family homes are reduced to rubble. PBS NewsHour producer Shams Odeh.
More than 10 tens of houses was demolished, as you see in the pictures. Here, where the Israeli commander said that they released 2 of the hostages, here from Rafah, Mashabur upward. If you look around me, you see all the house had been destroyed completely. And there's a lot of people killed here in this place in Rafah.
Hamas said the Israeli operation killed at least 3 other hostages and wounded 5 more. Israel says it can't confirm that and accuses Hamas of lying about the hostages' fate. Rafah is home to 1.3 million displaced Gazans, but Netanyahu has ordered the Israeli military to develop plans to move civilians and besiege the city, where Israel says Hamas leadership is hiding. The international community is pushing back. Top European Union diplomat Josep Borrell.
Netanyahu has been asking to the evacuation of 1.7 million people without saying where these people could be evacuated.
The UN.
A potential full-fledged military incursion into Rafah, where some 1.5 million Palestinians are packed against the Egyptian border with nowhere further to flee, is terrifying.
Egypt has threatened to suspend its 45-year-old peace treaty with Israel. And a senior administration official said President Biden told Netanyahu that moving the population was a, quote, precondition of an operation, and it can't, quote, proceed without a credible plan.
Many people there have been displaced multiple times, fleeing the violence to the north, and now they're packed into Rafah, exposed and vulnerable. They need to be protected. And we've also been clear from the start. We oppose any forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza.
Israel and the U.S. believe about 100 hostages remain alive in Gaza. More than 100 gained freedom in November thanks to a diplomatic agreement between Israel and Hamas. Progress is being made for another release. A senior administration official says the framework is, quote, pretty much now in place, and the initial phase is actually finished, but significant differences remain.
The key element of the deals are on the table. There are gaps that remain, but I've encouraged Israeli leaders to keep working to achieve the deal.
President Biden's calls to protect those in Rafah came as he met with Jordan's King Abdullah at the White House this week. During the visit, Abdullah urged against an escalation of the war and stressed the need for a two-state solution.
We cannot afford an Israeli attack on Rafah. It is certain to produce another humanitarian catastrophe. The situation is already unbearable for over 1 million people who have been pushed into Rafah since the war started. We cannot stand by and let this continue. We need a lasting ceasefire now. This war must end. We must urgently and immediately work to ensure the sustainable delivery of sufficient aid to Gaza through all possible entry points and mechanisms. And I thank you, Mr. President, for your support on this.
Palestinians in Rafah face the threat of fleeing again, but they have nowhere to go. The UN warned of a, quote, slaughter as Israel threatens a full-scale invasion of the city. After heavy bombing this week, Gazans in Rafah spoke about the terror of the ongoing violence and their continued fight to survive.
We were home when the airstrikes happened. I told my mom I needed to use the bathroom. Then all the walls of the bathroom and everything above it fell on me.
Last night was really terrible. We lived in terror as if it were doomsday. There was gunfire in every direction and we had nowhere to go. They told us this area was safe. They told us Rafah was safe. The bombardment was in every direction, not knowing where to turn or where to go. We felt like we were going to die.
We were sitting at a corner of the street at night, between roughly 1:15 and 1:30, when we were surprised by a black Jeep moving past us. After its passing, there were clashes in the area, and then we found ourselves running with our children from airstrikes in every direction. There were more than 17, 18 airstrikes. Whether we went right or left, we found airstrikes. We took our children and placed them in safe houses.
I'm talking to you now amid the debris, between the parts of my family and their clothes. As you have seen, I was extracting them, and I saw the remains of our house so I could keep something left that remind me of my family.
These children, they should consider the little children. What kind of ordeal is this? Families and children are torn to pieces. My son is injured in Gaza, as well as my daughter-in-law, both of them. I couldn't help get them out. And I have my grandkids with me. This is not a life, not at all.
As everyone knows, the only nursery that's almost operational in the Gaza Strip today is in Rafah. Unfortunately, we now admit the newborns and fervently pray for them, but it's exceedingly challenging for them to survive in this situation rife with infections and complications. Most of them do not survive, which is deeply distressing for us as a team.
And now they are trying to push us out of Rafah. Where would we go? Fly in the sky? We only have angels to take our souls and fly us in the sky and be done with it all.
We're tired. We're always crying. Martyrs, shelling, destruction, death, starvation, thirst. There's no food.
I'm trying to get food for my little children, and I have many at home. They get hungry. We try to bring them food, and adults remain hungry so we can feed the young.
The U.S., alongside Egypt and Qatar, is mediating efforts between Israel and Hamas to agree to pause the war in exchange to release Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. I spoke to Jeff Bennett this week about the state of those negotiations.
Israel's prime minister appeared to take a hard line in negotiations that would pause the war to allow for the release of some Israeli hostages. What's the latest there?
Netanyahu today repeated his hard line that he has said multiple times. One, that there needs to be military pressure on Hamas in southern Gaza in order to make any progress on hostages. And he also again called Hamas's demands when it came to the hostages, quote, delusional. And so where we are is that Israel continues to have the hard line, but U.S. officials privately say that Netanyahu is allowing progress to be made on the hostage deal and that negotiations are ongoing, especially after meeting yesterday in Cairo with Israeli, U.S. spy chiefs and other diplomats. And so this is where we are on the hostage deal. As we recall, 2 weeks ago, Israel agreed to a plan negotiated by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt to an initial 6-week pause with 3 phases of hostage releases and 3 phases of pauses in the war. Hamas's counterproposal last week required an Israeli withdrawal from cities first and then from all of Gaza. Israel interpreted that as Hamas remaining in power. So where are we publicly? Netanyahu takes a hard line, and that helps him keep pressure militarily on Hamas, which the U.S. does believe helps in these hostage negotiations. It also helps relieve pressure on Netanyahu within his own government. Because, of course, his own coalition on the right wing, they don't want him to stop this war, and they don't want him to make a deal that would release hostages if it means the end of the war before Hamas is destroyed. So the bottom line, U.S. officials will believe that Netanyahu will allow progress to be made on the hostages as he threatens an assault on Rafah, that is the city in southern Gaza where 1.3 million Gazans have fled. And the question tonight is, will Netanyahu allow more progress to be made first, or will there be an assault on Rafah?
Yeah. Well, bring us up to speed on Israel's effort in terms of taking out Hamas leadership.
So the target in Rafah right now, Jeff, is what Israel calls the final 4 battalions of Hamas's military capacity. The target in Khan Yunis, where Israel has been fighting ferociously for weeks, is underground. And that is the tunnels where Israel believes the leadership of Hamas is hiding. And Israel released yesterday this video that it says shows the leader of Hamas, Yair Sinwar, who walked out there. Right there, you see that. That's an Israeli animation there, walking out with his family, with his children, and with his wife underneath a tunnel in Khan Yunis on October the 10th. And what Israel says is that Yahya Sinwar was surrounded by millions of dollars as well as civilians. But above ground in Khan Yunis, Israel continues the assault today. It ordered the evacuation of Nasser Hospital. And just this afternoon, Doctors Without Borders today criticized that evacuation order, saying that, quote, the people inside have nowhere to go. Either they become an Israeli target in the hospital or enter a, quote, apocalyptic landscape outside of it.
Wow. Thanks, Shifrin. Thanks so much for that reporting. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Tensions are escalating at Israel's northern border. Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah, which the U.S. labels a terrorist group and operates out of southern Lebanon, have traded fire routinely since October the 7th. But this week, the violence increased as some 80,000 residents of northern Israel continue to be displaced. For more than a century, Tal Levitt's family has called this valley home. Metula is Israel's northernmost town, where Levitt runs a farm 500 feet from Lebanon, 500 feet from Hezbollah militants on the other side of his apple orchard, too close for comfort.
We're neighbors, and they see us all the time, what we do, where we go, what we make.
And since October the 7th, they've been seeing and striking. On October 14th, a rocket hit his orchard. And last week, in response to an Israeli attack in Lebanon, Tal himself was the target. This is the aftermath. His kitchen ceiling collapsed. It was a direct hit straight through his roof.
They saw me go inside to my home, and I go out. After 2 hours, they throw a rocket to my home. They think I'm inside, but when I go, they not see that.
Metula is in the lower Galilee, about 30 miles north of the Sea of Biblical Renown, and is the only Israeli city surrounded by an international border on 3 sides. It's been around for more than 120 years. The Levitts are one of 20 founding families. That's his great-grandmother in Metula in the 1890s. Tal Levitt is a 6th-generation farmer. That's him in the middle when he was 4 years old. But now he has to start from scratch.
My home is crashed, and I need to make a new home, to build everything new.
For more than 4 months, Israel and Hezbollah have traded fire. Israeli airstrikes into Lebanon have killed hundreds of Hezbollah fighters and dozens of civilians. The deadliest strike was yesterday. It killed 10 and blew out this apartment complex. Israel said it killed a Hezbollah commander. Hezbollah has fired hundreds of rockets into Israel. Many are intercepted by Israeli air defense, but others have killed 9 Israeli soldiers and 6 civilians. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah promises more attacks until the war in Gaza stops.
We are fighting in southern Lebanon with our eyes on Gaza. We are rational, meticulous, and disciplined people. But if you broaden, we broaden. You escalate, we escalate.
Hezbollah can, with precision, thanks to Iranian technology. Israel says Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets and missiles that can reach 95% of Israel, including its largest city, Tel Aviv. The U.S. believes neither side wants war, but the risk is high. Israel's defense ministry released video of what it called an exercise for a Lebanon war.
We have no interest in war, but we must prepare. The planes that are flying in Lebanon's sky as we speak have targets. We can do copy-paste from Gaza to Beirut.
Metula is now a military camp. The military has evacuated some 80,000 residents across the north, including Levitt's family. His wife and 4 children have lived in a hotel for nearly 4 months.
My family, my kids, it's very hard to survive this. But I tell them, we don't have another place to go. We don't go to USA now or Europe or something. We have Israel.
That the government don't do the thing that they should do to our citizens and to our residents.
Moshe Davidovitz is the mayor of the northern community of Mate Asher and leads a council for northern Israel residents. He says trust between the government and those residents has been broken.
The government is supposed to give the residents security. And this contract between the government and the citizens is not exist.
France and the U.S. are trying through diplomacy to push Hezbollah back at least 6 miles from the border. But U.S. officials doubt whether that can succeed with cross-border firing that continues even today during our interview.
There is now there is a missiles shooting. I heard it just in this minute. Now we're supposed to get to the shelters.
There's missiles being fired now.
Just now, yeah. So I want to thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And so the danger to the people and of wider war is inescapable. Providing aid for this conflict has played out in the halls of the Capitol this week as the Senate passed a $95 billion foreign aid package. Lisa Desjardins breaks down what this would mean for Israel and Gaza.
Since World War II, Israel has been the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid. And in recent years, in fact, right now, before October 7th, Israel was on track to get $3.8 billion a year from the United States. After October 7th, Israel had greater needs, it said. And one of the results was this bill that passed the Senate. In it, the Senate authorized $14 billion to go to Israel, so triple the amount that Israel was going to get in any other given year. Now, where does that go? About $4 billion of that would be set aside specifically for Iron Dome. It's an air defense system. Now, the rest of it, some senators said was unrestricted. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont in particular had an issue with that. He voted against the bill for that reason. Now, the U.S. has a law called the Leahy Law, and that means that the U.S. cannot give foreign military funding to any military that it knows is committing humanitarian offenses, violating human rights. Bernie Sanders and others have said that this is a problem and has been a problem with Israel for years. But the U.S. Senate voted to pass this bill and said that they're obviously trying to defend Israel, saying that Israel needs the money. So this is a point of debate that we will continue to hear more about. Now, this bill also contains money for residents of Gaza. Some $9 billion would go to humanitarian aid. It's not just for Gaza. It would also go potentially to the West Bank, to those in Ukraine who are suffering right now in war, and it could go to other places all around the world. So we don't really know exactly how much of that would get to Gaza and how. It would be distributed by U.S. government officials who generally distribute that kind of humanitarian aid. $9 billion is a very large amount, obviously would help a lot of people. This bill itself, however, we're not clear on how far it would go. There are questions about how that Gaza aid would be watched. In the bill, it contains millions of dollars for inspectors general here in the United States to look at how aid is distributed in Gaza specifically. So this bill has a lot of points of debate in it. It has billions of dollars that would go to the Middle East, to Israel, and to humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Right now, this bill itself, however, is frozen. We are not sure how, if, or when the U.S. House will act on it.
After months of disturbing and painful images coming out of the war, adults and children still have questions about the conflict. Digital senior editor Yasmin Alamiri spoke to child psychologist Robin Gurwitch on how to talk about the difficult emotions surrounding the war.
Since the Israel-Hamas war began, news and social media have been filled with horrific and traumatizing images and reports. These can be tough to digest for adults, and they're especially difficult for children. To discuss how parents can talk through this with their kids and their teens, I'm joined by child psychologist Dr. Robin Gurwitch. Dr. Gurwitch, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Yasmin.
So let's start with the most basic thing. Do we talk to our kids about the war at all? And if so, when or how do we bring it up?
So to answer your first question, absolutely, positively, yes. We know that when we don't talk about difficult things, children may not bring it up because they're worried they're going to upset you. And all of the science tells us if adults will bring it up, they have a better chance of helping children cope with what's going on. It is not easy to bring up difficult conversations, but I think take a deep breath and jump in to that conversation. You can start as simply as there's a war going on in Israel and Gaza. Tell me what you know. Take your cue from your children. When they bring it up, sit down and answer it. Truly don't say, let's talk about it later. Being aware that children may bring it up multiple times, and particularly for school age or even a little bit younger children, don't be surprised if they ask you the same question over and over and over again. It's not that they're wanting different answers. They're just trying to process the answer that you continue to give them.
So how would we speak to younger kids versus, say, teenagers about this?
With younger children, I think the big, broad brushstrokes, one of the things they're really asking about is, am I safe and are you safe? So it is very important to help them know that this is happening far away if you're in, for example, the United States. And our family is doing everything we know how to do to make sure our family does stay safe and that our friends and our neighbors and the people we care about are safe. I think it is important to give them information. It is okay to tell them there are many people that are hurt and there are some people that have died. And we feel very sad and bad about that. But it is equally important not to go into gruesome details. That is not important. As children get older, they understand more nuances. They understand that there aren't black and white answers to everything. Sometimes when we ask teens, I mean, it's the same with teens all over the place. How are you doing? And they say, fine. With teenagers, sometimes we may get more by saying, tell me what your friends are saying about all of this.
A lot of kids are seeing this content on social media where parents have little to no control. How do we help them deal with the unexpectedly traumatic things that they may come across in their feeds?
Check in. Ask them what they're watching. Look at it. If there are parental controls, particularly with school-age children, put those on. We know that there's quite a bit on social media right now that is not appropriate for anybody to be watching right now. So I think it's important to take an active role into looking at the social media, checking in on it, and making sure that you have set up some guidelines.
So social media is not always a trusted source. How do we make sure that we tell our kids what they're seeing is not always accurate? And how do we direct them to more trusted information?
talking to them about, just as you said, there are lots of things that are out there that aren't true. And that's why we're having this hard conversation. So you know that I will always be as honest as I can be with you for everything I know. So if you're questioning something or if you see something that you're concerned about, please talk to me. This is also an opportunity, I think, as hard as the conversations are to have, for parents and caregivers to take an opportunity to think about what are the values, what are the beliefs that you hold about how we treat others and how we wish to be treated.
We know, unfortunately, that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are on the rise in this country. And we also know that this is playing out between children on the playground and in schools. How do we help kids cope with being stereotyped or if they're being bullied?
I think it is important for us as adults, when we have the difficult conversation, to also help them identify. If you ever feel like somebody is making you uncomfortable, if they're doing or saying anything to you, please let's think about who you would tell, what you would say. So help them identify trusted adults. I think it's important for adults to think about who are their safe people? Who do they go to talk this through? I think we've all done that in these last weeks. I think it is also important to help them consider, if you say something, if you see something, what are your responsibilities? What should you do? And it's not necessarily that you need to intervene as much as tell somebody or to support someone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gurwitch, for helping us navigate these tough conversations. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
For all of us at PBS News Weekly, thanks so much for watching.